Imagine hearing the words that no child ever expects to hear from their parents. If you don't pay your sister's mortgage, we'll take you to court. It sounds like some twisted plotline from a dark family drama, right? But for me, it wasn't a movie. It wasn't fiction. It was my life unraveling in the most surreal way possible. One decision, one firm refusal to take on someone else's financial disaster suddenly turned into a lawsuit worth almost $300,000, with my parents standing across the courtroom as my enemies. It began with what I thought was an ordinary Sunday dinner. My parents invited me over, and the air felt strange even before I sat down. My sister and her husband were there too, both looking nervous, whispering to each other while my mom prepared plates. As soon as we finished eating, my dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk about something important." My stomach tightened because that phrase never meant anything good. Then came the bombshell. My sister's house was in danger. She and her husband hadn't been able to keep up with the mortgage, and foreclosure was only weeks away. My mom looked me right in the eyes and said, "You're the only one who can save her. We expect you to step up." I froze. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke. Why me? Why was I suddenly responsible for a mess I didn't create? My sister lived far above her means. Luxury vacations, brand new cars every couple of years, shopping sprees she posted about constantly. Meanwhile, I lived carefully, saving every penny, working extra hours to build a life I could rely on. And now, because I was the responsible one, they wanted me to take over her mortgage? My voice shook, but I said it clearly, "No, that's not my responsibility." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My mom's eyes welled up with tears, my dad's face turned red with anger, and my sister crossed her arms, scowling like a child denied candy. They told me family sacrifices for family, that my success was meaningless if I didn't share it with the people who needed it more. They tried guilt, they tried emotional blackmail, they even told me I'd regret it when my sister ended up homeless. But I didn't budge. I had worked too hard to carry the weight of someone else's reckless choices. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure only grew. Calls every night, texts filled with accusations like, "How can you be so heartless?" and "Money has made you selfish." I stopped answering. I thought maybe if I distanced myself, the storm would pass. But then one morning, there was a knock at my door. A man in a suit handed me an envelope, heavy and official looking. Inside was a lawsuit. My parents and sister were suing me for $295,000, the remaining balance on her mortgage. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. Parents are supposed to protect their children, not drag them into court. Reading those papers was like staring at a betrayal so deep it almost didn't feel real. They claimed I had verbally agreed to take over her debt. They said I had a moral and financial obligation as a member of the family. They twisted casual conversations into binding promises. And worst of all, they were prepared to stand before a judge and paint me as the villain. Walking into that courtroom for the first time is something I'll never forget. The room was cold, sterile, but the tension burned hot inside me. My parents sat across the aisle, their lawyer whispering in their ears. My sister smirked like she'd already won. And me? I sat there alone with my attorney, my chest tight, my hands trembling. The judge called the case, and suddenly, my family was no longer my family. They were plaintiffs, and I was the defendant. Their lawyer went first, spinning a story that made me out to be selfish, greedy, ungrateful. They painted my sister as the struggling victim, a mother just trying to keep a roof over her children's heads. They claimed I had promised, multiple times, to help her, and that my refusal had put the entire family in jeopardy. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Then it was my lawyer's turn. Calm, steady, and precise, he dismantled their claims piece by piece. He showed the judge my financial records, my text messages, my emails, all proof that I had never once agreed to take on their debt. He highlighted the vacations, the cars, the reckless spending habits of my sister, and then he asked the question that hung heavy in the air. Why should my client's hard work in savings be punished for someone else's irresponsibility? In that moment, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. My parents had spent their entire lives expecting obedience, demanding sacrifices, holding family over their heads like a weapon. For years, I had played the role of the dutiful child. But this time, I drew a line. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just defending my bank account, I was defending my freedom. What shocked me most was how easily they could twist love into leverage, how quickly they went from parents to prosecutors. I couldn't help but wonder how many people go through life shackled by family obligations, told that sacrifice is proof of love. How many people give away their peace, their future, their very identity because they're too afraid to say no. The case dragged on for weeks, each hearing more draining than the last. I would walk past them in the hallways, my mother refusing to look at me, my dad glaring like I was a stranger. My sister avoided eye contact entirely, her smirk replaced by something colder, disdain. Every night, I'd go home and collapse on the couch, exhausted, replaying the arguments in my head. And every morning, I woke up with the same thought. How did my life come to this? But the longer it went on, the clearer things became. I started to see patterns I had ignored for years. How my parents always favored my sister, how they excused her mistakes, how they celebrated her victories while expecting me to handle the fallout. This lawsuit wasn't born overnight. It was the culmination of decades of imbalance, favoritism, and manipulation. This was just the first time I'd stood my ground. When the final hearing came, my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. The judge listened carefully, weighing both sides. And then with a firm voice that cut through the room, he dismissed their case. Their claims had no legal standing. I was free. No debt, no obligation, no responsibility. Just free. But walking out of that courtroom didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. Because while I had protected myself, I had lost my parents. The relationship, whatever it once had been, was gone. They couldn't see past their anger, their disappointment, their belief that family meant unconditional sacrifice. And maybe that's the harshest truth of all. That sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But still, I walked out with my head high. I had chosen myself. I had chosen to say no. And though it cost me my family, it gave me something far more valuable. The freedom to live without guilt, without fear, without being chained to someone else's mistakes. And maybe that's a lesson we all need to hear. Love doesn't mean surrender. Family doesn't mean servitude. And saying no doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to carry a burden that was never yours to begin with. Subscribe for more stories that make you think twice about what family really means. I walked away from that courtroom with a strange cocktail of emotions swirling inside me: relief, sorrow, and a faint but undeniable sense of liberation. For the first time, I felt the chains that had held me for so long begin to fall away. But the story didn't end at the courthouse steps. That was only the beginning of something even more profound: the rebuilding of my life without the weight of their expectations crushing me. The silence that followed was deafening. My phone, once buzzing with angry messages and guilt trips, went completely still. No calls from my mother demanding I do the right thing, no lectures from my father about duty and sacrifice, no bitter texts from my sister dripping with entitlement. At first, that silence felt unnatural, like walking into an abandoned house where the echoes of past arguments still lingered in the walls. But over time, I realized it was peace, the kind of peace I hadn't known I'd been craving my entire life. I started noticing how much lighter my days felt without the constant tug of war for my loyalty. I began focusing on my own goals again, dusting off dreams I had shelved because I was always pulled into someone else's crisis. I spent more time with friends who supported me without conditions, people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. For once, I was living my life without apologizing for it. But even in that freedom, there were moments of grief. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake replaying childhood memories, family vacations, birthday parties, the way my parents used to cheer at my school events. I'd ask myself, was that love real, or was it just another thread in the web of control they were weaving all along? Those questions cut deeper than any lawsuit ever could because they made me doubt the very foundation of my past. And yet, I refused to let bitterness define me. I began to understand that my parents' actions said more about them than they ever did about me. Their demand, their lawsuit, their coldness, it wasn't proof of my failure as a child. It was proof of their inability to separate love from obligation. That realization didn't heal the wounds overnight, but it gave me clarity. And clarity, I learned, is one of the most powerful tools we can carry. One day, months after the case ended, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She looked at me with sympathy and whispered, "I heard about what happened. I just want you to know you did the right thing." I almost broke down right there between the cereal and the canned soup, because for so long, I had been painted as the villain in my own family story. Hearing someone else validate my choice reminded me that I wasn't crazy, selfish, or cruel. I was simply protecting myself. That encounter sparked something in me. If I could find strength in someone else's perspective, maybe others could too. I started sharing my story, not just with close friends, but in support groups and online forums where people talked about toxic family dynamics. I was stunned by how many people related. People who had been pressured to pay off siblings' debts, who were manipulated into sacrificing their futures for ungrateful relatives, who were shamed for daring to say no. My story wasn't unique. It was part of a much larger pattern. And that's when I realized the real takeaway. This wasn't just about me winning a case in court. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my life. It was about breaking a cycle that had gone on too long. It was about refusing to pass that burden on to the next generation. Because if there's one thing worse than living under someone else's expectations, it's teaching your own children to do the same. Looking back, I see the lawsuit not as the destruction of my family, but as the revelation of its truth. It forced me to confront reality, to see the favoritism, the manipulation, the unhealthy patterns I had ignored for years. It was painful, yes, but it was also the push I needed to finally step into my own power. Now, when I think about my parents and my sister, I don't feel anger as much as I feel distance. They made their choices, and I made mine. And while they may never forgive me, I've learned that forgiveness isn't about them, it's about me. Forgiving myself for years of compliance, forgiving myself for feeling guilty, forgiving myself for believing that love meant sacrifice. That's the kind of forgiveness that sets you free. So here's the truth I want to leave you with. You are not obligated to destroy yourself for the sake of family. You don't owe your stability to someone else's recklessness, and you don't have to earn love by paying for it in dollars or obedience. Real love doesn't come with invoices or ultimatums. When I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't just win a case, I won myself back. And if you've ever felt trapped under the crushing weight of someone else's expectations, maybe it's time you did the same. Sometimes, the hardest battles we fight aren't against strangers, but against the people we once called home. And sometimes, the only way to win is to walk away with your dignity intact. Choose yourself, always. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the truths we often keep hidden.